Hey everyone, thanks for being here. And to the panel, I'm going to let them introduce themselves for this session. You'll hear each of them speak, and they're going to speak to a bunch of things. I thought I would just start off by throwing a few things out there. So here you go. You can, in case you haven't checked out your program, there we are. I think they're easily recognizable by dress and facial hair. This is my faculty profile. Doesn't mean much, but I didn't start out in this particular way. I spent about 14 years doing this kind of thing, and so it's a little bit dark because, of course, in the early 90s, we didn't have phones with cameras and stuff like that, so I don't even know where this picture came from, but that is me standing in front of a group of students and had a very enjoyable career doing that particular kind of thing, but I did have a lot of questions because inevitably at the end of the grade 12 year, there would be students who would come up to me. These students had been in there for 5-6 years, passionate, loved everything, and then they would say things like, hey, do you know anybody who wants to buy my clarinet or my trumpet? And I think, why would you ever do that? Why would you want to sell your instrument? You've loved this. Nobody's forced you to be here. You love music. But then, of course, their answer was, well, I'm not going to be a professional musician or go into music in university, so why would I need my instrument? Now, I thought about this for a long time, and this is not intended as a little advertising thing, but I took that as a challenge, and so the last 5 years or so, I've been working on this Canadian Community Music Group database project. There's over 1,600 groups in there, and it's essentially for the purpose that there are all those people who come out of school music programs and maybe they don't know where to start, or maybe they don't know that there are other groups out there. Again, I'll leave it at that and return to here and think, okay, what is the purpose? Why did I do this? Because I was always filled with these questions, and to start off, maybe I was filled with this question of, well, why learn music? Or more specifically, why learn music in school? And I would like to throw out that those are maybe two very different questions. We don't need to necessarily dwell on that, but I would like to at least propose the possibility that those are two different questions. And in thinking through this for a long time, I brought those questions to my current role. Now, this is not advertising for the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto, but I was drawn to the fact that it says on our institutional webpage, why study music at UTSC? And I think that that's a little bit misleading. If you know anything about the Scarborough campus, it's in the US, it would be called a small liberal arts college. You basically get a Bachelor of Arts degree or a Bachelor of Science degree. So you're not studying music in the Bachelor of Music sense. You're just getting one of those two degrees, and you're not really studying music. You can take music courses, and you can participate in a variety of ways. So up in the upper left, yes, we have some what you might consider traditional, like, orchestra or concert choir and whatnot. But the rest of those images are not Google images. Those are actual photos from our campus. That's what people do. And I think about this a lot because all these students, they're studying biology or computer science or mental health studies, and then they happen to just also like participating in music in various ways. And I raised this, and in case you haven't gathered just from our appearance, we're intending to be a little bit provocative here today. And so you can disagree with me on this, but I've been studying this for a very long time, and the discourse of studying music in school and in university, it tends to, based on its curriculum and instruction, focus on that top question of what is good music. That's a big thing. There's a lot of discussion about quality repertoire, and you can, when you go into festivals, they give you lists of stuff that your ensembles are supposed to perform. And I have to tell you that my experience at UTSC, engaging with all those students, they aren't that concerned about the question of what is good music. They're much more interested in the question of what is music good for? How can it help their lives? What do they do with it? How can we engage with it? So on Thursday nights, such as tonight, after I'm done teaching my graduate class, I head down to this pub on the Danforth. Some of you might know the Black Swan, and a group of people, just random people, they just drop in and they start playing Irish music. And you can see, I mean, a few of those people do look to be retired, but a lot of them are not. They're just regular, ordinary people. And what they like to do on a Thursday night is show up at a pub and maybe have a few pints and play Irish music, because this is what they love to do. It's part of their life. Now, this is not intended as any advertising, but I've been invested in this particular topic for quite a long time now. And, you know, the word leisure can be a rather loaded term. Some people, of course, associate it with privilege, you know, the privilege of leisure, and some people think about it in terms of consumption and all sorts of things. But for the ancient Greeks, that word, the Greek word is skole, but if you pronounce it one way, skole, or the other way, skole, it means both leisure and education, because for the ancient Greeks, it spoke to the nature of existence. It spoke to what does it mean to live a good life? What is the meaning of life? How can we live life in the best possible way? And they concerned themselves with that a lot. And because my background is in music, it just happened to be convenient that for the ancient Greeks, music and contemplation were the two ultimate goals in skole. So when I think about musical activity and engagement, and I think about what do we mean by social impact, the title of today's panel, I think maybe we also mean what do we mean by the social impact of music making, or at least that's the way I'm interpreting it. There are quite a few scholarly endeavors out there. This is one, and I realize it's a little bit small depending on if you're at the back or the front. There's a journal that's been around for a few years now called Music and Arts in Action. And you might not be able to see some of those titles there, but you know, cultural capital and symbolic violence. You know, things that seem a little bit provocative, perhaps. You know, a musical psychosocial model for attending to victims of the armed conflict in Colombia. And you can see here in 2023, youth orchestras and Sistema-inspired programs for socio-artistic intervention. So these kinds of concerns with music making and social impact are on the minds of many people. Now, there's this field out there you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't heard of it, that book on the left there it's like about this thick and it weighs about 17 pounds. So you can learn about a little bit more. I have a particular connection, as does Diane in the audience, with this journal about this field. So I'm the editor of this particular journal, and I thought I would just as an example, I would share with you. I apologize for the purple. These are actually the page proofs for the upcoming issue. But if we look at these titles here, Conflict Transformation Between First Nations and Settler Peoples in Australia, or The Darkness of Mental Illness, you know, the Commonweal's community music group that's in Scotland, you know, interventions for children in Syrian refugee camps during the pandemic, Melodies of Hope for Street Children in Cochabamba, that's in Colombia, and intergenerational music making in Thailand, and trauma-informed practices for adult community music ensembles. These are the kinds of concerns that a lot of people are focusing in on. Now, of all of the things we could possibly mean by social impact, I've thought a lot about health and well-being as maybe a meta version, and together with Lloyd McGarten, we did a study a few years ago. We produced lots of figures and graphs and everything. It was quite a big study, and we looked at any of the terms like quality of life, well-being, all of these music and health types of terms as they were found in like 20 years of this journal. And on the one hand, it was very impressive. On the other hand, no one ever really defines or operationalizes any of these terms. We just use well-being in its sort of colloquial everyday sense, or quality of life in its everyday sense. And so people tend to speak a lot in generalities. On the left there is Stephen Clift. He's in the UK. He's been, for a number of years, very heavily involved with lots of music and health research, specifically singing, all right? But Stephen is also a member of this new network, the International Network for the Critical Appraisal of Arts and Health Research. And so while Stephen and others are absolutely passionate about the potential for music's positive social impact, he's also highly critical. And so I'm going to end off by suggesting that maybe one of the questions we could be asking, and we'll be hearing from our other panelists here, is how we can promote music's potential for positive social impact without lapsing into some of the exaggerated or unsupported claims that sometimes get made in its name. So I think with that, yeah, CC, you can recognize it by the beard. I'm going to pass the baton here to Richard.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Marcella from Community Music Schools of Toronto. Just a little bit of background on our program. We've been in the city of Toronto. We started as the Regent Park School of Music about 26 years ago, which was offering free music lessons to students in the Regent Park neighborhood, obviously. And we started reaching about 71 students and have since grown to reaching about, oh, my mic's happening. Sure. Yeah, and we've since grown to reaching about 875 kids across the state. So we're in Regent Park. I have a talent for destroying microphones with my voice. 2 down. That's better, yeah. So tired batteries, it's been a long Congress. Anyway, so yeah, we're reaching 875 students across the city. So we're in Regent Park, which was one of the most underserved community housing projects in North America, and one of the largest community housing projects in North America. So that's inevitably where the program was born. And we've since expanded to the Jane Finch neighborhood, reaching about 225 students out there every week. So we run 7 days a week. It's an after-school music program. We do everything, as it says on the slide, from turntables and beat making through to noise music. So we really try to veer off the beaten path of Royal Conservatory exams as much as possible. We do send some students for Royal Conservatory should they wish to go in that direction, but it's really not it's really, should I say, not encouraged. Well, there's a whole text chat going on there behind the scenes. I can't see now. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. I can adapt. So yes, we have over 52 faculty members who are really unparalleled, amazing, one-of-a-kind educators that are doing this kind of work. And I just want to touch a little bit in the short time that I have on some of the partnerships that we've been able to bring to life in the last 26 years. Notably, more recently, the Kingsway Music Library, under the producer Frank Dukes, we did a project where we made a music library with our students, everything from steel pans to violins, harps, human voice, and that was sampled and put on a Taylor Swift track after the fact. So if you look up the song, "It's Nice to Have a Friend," that's our students singing in the background, and it's a whole innovative model that kind of takes some of the funding from the publishing of that song and filters back into our program to help continue to make the program sustainable and free for 875 kids a week. So that's an example of a partnership that's really evolved. We have a new sample pack coming out in 2026 with the band Pup. It'll be our 6th sample library in collaboration with various artists across the country. Wood Green, who used to be Turning Point Youth Services, we have a youth justice program that's been going on for the last decade. I think Bina and AK would have been speaking on that this morning. Hi. And that's students in open custody come to our program once a week to work on music programs, beat making, anything really that they're interested in. we try to foster that, and we're doing more research on that in the coming years to come. So that's over a decade strong. And then just interesting collaborations that come up through being in the neighborhood and kind of entrenched in the community. Bob Ezrin called us up pre-pandemic and said, "Do you want to sing on an Andrea Bocelli album?" And so, of course, we said yes to that, and that was fantastic. We are collaborating with Toronto Metropolitan University on a synthesizer club. It's like modular synthesizers. It's an open program, a drop-in program. It's tonight at 7 p.m. If anyone's interested at our Regent Park location, come on down. So I'm just gonna, I've been paying attention to the clock here, and I think I'm still on good time. So here's a photo of us with Bob Ezrin and a recording. I was mentioning the band Pup earlier. That was us in the studio making the sample pack with them. So you can learn more about our program at communitymusic.org, but I'm thrilled to be on this panel with all my wonderful colleagues here, and gonna pass it on to Imogen.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Great. So yeah, I was really excited I'm excited to be here. And the questions that Roger posed in the introduction there, and in his presentation, and in the headline of this panel really intrigued me. The question that I want to explore in this presentation is how we talk about and measure social impact without replicating and perpetuating the very systems of oppression that community music projects usually aim to challenge. So I'm going to do that by drawing on my research with a project called Sex Workers Opera, which I've been involved with for the past 8 years as a volunteer, a performer, a researcher, and an evaluator. So Sex Workers Opera, it's a musical theatre project made by and for sex workers that started in London, England in 2014. The cast and crew are 50% sex workers and 50% allies, but audiences don't know who is who. So that meant that the project could be sex worker-led while protecting members from the stigma associated with being publicly out as a sex worker, which is pretty tricky to deal with. So the group created a performance with the same name, Sex Workers Opera, that toured between 2014 and 2018. It was based on real sex workers' stories belonging to members or sent in by sex workers around the world. The project has an archive of over 100 stories from over 18 different countries across 6 continents. So it's a pretty good representation of the experiences of different sex workers. And the group collaborated to write songs together, and members also contributed songs from their own creativity. So it's quite an interesting performance with lots of different styles and lots of different experiences. My research with Sex Workers Opera was funded by SIMM, which I'm sure Lucas will probably talk more about, or no? Okay, maybe, who knows? And the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in the UK. It involved participant observation and interviews with project directors and members, which included performers, musicians, and the tech team as well. In one of the interviews with a member, I raised the issue of trying to understand the social impact of Sex Workers Opera. And she responded by saying, "This question, what is the social impact? Think about the word impact. Think how aggressive it is, that word. And if on top of that, you're calling my community a target population, well, don't. Hello, we are not your target." It wasn't a direct response to anything I'd said, but it was a critique of the language used by NGOs, nonprofits, and funding agencies in relation to work with marginalized groups. It got me thinking about 2 things. The first one is the direction of impact, and the second one is the force of impact. I became interested in looking at how we might work with ideas and measurements of social impact without imposing problematic assumptions onto the communities that we're working within. Social impact is often talked about as being directed toward the people who might be called participants in community music projects. In this model, a facilitating musician works with a group of people who then see the benefits of the music making in other areas of their lives. But as Bridie Lee Bartlett warns, there's a risk that this leads into welfare-like narratives about the hero artist helping at-risk participants and communities with little critical reflection about the ethical dimensions this evokes. It might overlook music making that already exists within the community, thereby erasing culture, and it might also imply that community members don't have their own ideas about how to address the social challenges and injustices that they're experiencing, thereby erasing agency. It can be linked to the idea of a deficit perspective, which insists that there's a problem that needs fixing. This mentality is evident in phrases like target population, language which came from funding and evaluation structures that have put pressure on organizations to prove that their projects have changed participants. And as Francois Matarasso writes, by changed, what was really meant was improved. This one-directional model of social impact doesn't really do anything to address systemic injustices affecting communities. Instead, it places the responsibility onto marginalized people to change so that they can deal with their oppression better. Ideas of social impact often focus on tangible effects. These can be useful, but they can also be seen as overly forceful or aggressive, as the sex workers opera member commented, almost becoming a form of domination. An alternative might be to focus on affects. Affects are feelings or emotions that are transmitted between people and experienced on a bodily level. Things like joy, love, hate, and anger. They're immeasurable, definitely not measurable, unpredictable, and can be fleeting. They're therefore the worst nightmare of researchers, evaluators, and funders. But as community musician and scholar Mary Abdulmalik Neal explains, they have the potential to connect people to other individuals, to communities, and to wider social and political contexts. In this way, they're a fundamental component of social and political change, linking individuals to systems. With roots in feminist and queer theory, affect is an established part of impact thinking in socially engaged theater and political performance. Alison Campbell and Stephen Farrier state that theater and live performances can, if they are powerful, move an audience to emotion, to thought, even on rare occasions, to action. Jill Dolan sees performance as having the potential to provoke affective rehearsals for revolution. Meanwhile, political theorist Brian Masumi sees the arts and their affects as an important part of political action. It seems to me that alternative political action does not have to fight against the idea that power has become affective, but rather has to learn to function itself on that same level. That requires, in some ways, a performative, theatrical, or aesthetic approach to politics. For example, it is not possible for a dispossessed group to adequately communicate its needs and desires through the usual channels. It just doesn't happen. Focusing on affect as well as effect enables us to consider less tangible impacts for participants, as well as to appreciate the impacts that participants might have on others through their music making. I'll give a quick example from Sex Workers Opera. At the end of the performance, the cast walked into the audience and sang a song called Listen to Me. Halfway through the song, they chose an audience member and asked them to come up with them onto the stage. The performance ended with the cast and audience members standing together, singing the repeated lyrics, "Listen to me," in harmony. For performers who were used to being silenced and stigmatized, this was quite profound. One member shared, "It never failed to move me to tears, that song. Pretty much every night, whenever we would go and get someone from the audience, I would just be like, oh yeah, okay, this means something." Meanwhile, for audiences, this kind of interaction created bonds with the performers. One audience member reported, "I've never so naturally stood up at the end of a show for a standing ovation. I felt like they'd been out there with us, toing and froing and kind of playing with our emotions in lots of different ways. So I felt really connected to them. It was wonderful." This doesn't mean that Listen to Me fixed any of the problems affecting sex workers or made audience members into staunch allies. But this connection between performers and audiences was powerful in that it modeled an alternative to stigma and silencing. This affective outcome can be seen as a social impact in itself, But it might also lead to more tangible effects, like someone attending a sex worker rights protest in the future, or challenging discrimination against sex workers in their community. Most importantly, it doesn't involve sex workers being improved. There is a lot of pressure from funders and institutions to report social impact in more conventional ways and to present work as transformative for the most marginalized. While that probably won't disappear anytime soon, I've tried to show very briefly that we can still be more critical, creative, and curious about the many ways that impact might manifest and the many different people it might affect. Thanks. And now I will pass on to Lee.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this esteemed group. In 2013 at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, we launched out with a new graduate program called a Master of Arts in Community Music. And in the intervening time, there have been dozens of research projects, as mandatory for our students to do, sometimes student projects, sometimes collaborative projects with faculty that have had some connection or application to people's lives in the community. There is a tension that rears its head every so often between the practitioners in community music, the facilitators, the people that are out there doing the work, and the scholars who are doing stuff about them doing work. And I wanted to give you several illustrations today of specific research practices that had direct engagement to communities. So the first one is called Sing Fires of Justice. 21 years ago, before we were doing community music, we collaborated with a couple of other faculties, interdisciplinary faculties, interfaith and intercultural groups, to shine a light on some social issue or concern in our area that would be responded to music and spoken word at an event of gathering. This picture showing now is when we were working with some Indigenous song keepers and knowledge keepers and addressing the issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We've had several encounters with them, but we've also, in the Sing Fires of Justice events, have worked on environmental justice, poverty, homelessness, newcomers, and this past Sunday was our 21st iteration of this, and we partnered with the Kitchener Public Library Southwest Community Branch, which is the first zero carbon net footprint building in our region, and it was designed in part by Indigenous architects and landscapers and artists from the Six Nations of the Grand River. The next project was a capstone by Sasha Judelson called the Circle of Music Intergenerational Choir, and it was a choir designed to bring a person with dementia or Alzheimer's together with their partner caregiver and a teenage volunteer and meet once a week and sing. This has been going for 9 years now, and the effect of this has had a fair bit of public journal, popular journal reporting. So on Saturday, front page of the Waterloo Region Record, which is our local newspaper, front page featured this project, and a guy named Sigmund, who has learned to sing again, and he sang on a video the national anthem, O Canada, and he sang it with strength and robustness, and he adopted the words that Julie Black did to change the words to sing Our Home on Native Land. He's so proud of that. And this project has been funded by a number of government organizations and research projects, and now we have funding to do a documentary film about it. This is an undergraduate project called the Yuva Youth Project, and Tamara Menon, the person in the middle, is from Mumbai, and she worked with a non-government organization there with people that are in the sex trade. And the ultimate project was to bring children from those families to Canada for a week, 10 days, it turned out to be 2 weeks, and to give them an experience of self-affirmation, self-identity, music, crafts, arts, interconnecting intersections with Canadian kids. This was hard. We had challenges with Canada immigration. They were concerned that people would come and not go home. But ultimately about a dozen, I think it was 15, 12, 13, 14-year-old youth from Mumbai spent some of their summer with us in a very exciting program. Again, I'm saying this is research that has social engaged impact. These are not articles that sit on shelves. These are visible, living, and some of them sustainable over the years. This was an early project in our program where one of our students was a high school music teacher, but was also an officer in the Canadian military, in the reserve. And she was working with veterans from the Afghan War. And many of them were dealing with their post-traumatic syndrome of really suffering and not feeling like they had agency or could tell their story. So she had her high school students, one of her classes, do a songwriting unit where they would go and interview these veterans, get their story, write a song together. Then the chamber orchestra of Waterloo Region conductor arranged several of these songs for orchestra and the kids to sing, and they presented a concert, invited the veterans, and they got to hear their story in a classical orchestra setting sung by the student composers of the song. So a very moving event. This teacher now has left teaching and is doing other not-profit work, but this resonates still in our community, this event that happened 10 years ago. Glenn Murray, another graduate from our MA program, is a singer-songwriter, an activist, lives in the Newmarket area, north of Toronto, did work on a regular basis, an annual basis, in the fly-in nation of Wabaquay in northwestern Ontario, a First Nations community, where the teenage suicide rate was enormously high. And through these arts and music-making projects, Glenn's work, along with his team, radically shifted that trauma, that tragedy of youth ending their lives because they saw no hope, there was no way out. Somehow the making of music together, both socially and creatively, gave them identity, gave them hope, and again, the project is not funded, it's not happening anymore, and suicide rates are up. In 2022, my phone rang. It was a familiar voice because this was a CEO of a cultural organization in our region. He's on the radio and TV a lot. We've got a little problem, he said. We're having the unzipped Rolling Stones exhibit come into our library. It's being funded by the region, thousands of dollars. And some of the people in the black music community are a little uncertain about why we would do that because there's no mention that the Rolling Stones were basically a blues band, are a blues band, and were influenced by blues musicians from Jackson, Mississippi and the South. Why isn't that in there? It's not in there at all. And long story short, and I just wrote a book chapter about this because it was a real journey for me, and I won't get into that today. But we decided with a committee of various musicians and people, respected black activists in our community, set up a symposium and a festival that celebrated the music of Mel Brown, who was one of Mick Jagger's introductions to blues music. And Mel Brown was an icon in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So a symposium, festivals where we had 3 big concerts. And this was just after COVID, so people had this pent-up kind of desire to go out and get to live music events. Long story short, it was a huge success. And along with that, we offered workshops for young, emerging black artists to write songs. and then we featured emerging hip-hop artists as well in these venues. We were able to get some celebrities in there, some people that had just won Juno, and our headliner for the Saturday night was Havaya Mighty. Some of you will know who that is, the first female rap artist to get a Juno Award. So that happened over 2 years, and in the third year it became, there were some issues around the Mel Brown brand. Some people had monetized it and created a Mel Brown beer, a Mel Brown t-shirt, and people were making profit off of that brand, and we had no propriety over that. So we changed it to the Grand River Black Music Festival. And out of that festival, again, an enlarged presence, the first ever festival in the Kitchener-Waterloo area that featured Black Afro-diasporic artists. And all the genres of that culture, those cultures were represented. Out of that, there was this general feeling that we don't need to do these one-off events anymore because these events had spawned a bunch of children. And some of them are amazing and going on. So one is called Black Brilliance, and that's where the Board of Education brings black kids together into the university setting for a day or two a year, some elementary, sometimes it's high school, to do inspirational workshops, inspirational speakers, celebrity artists, and give them this great charge of identity and helpfulness there. An event called Amplify showcases or shines a light on Black hip-hop artists in the area. Workshops in the Kitchener Public Library, several African, Black, and various other cultural music events now are happening in the Kitchener-Waterloo area as a result of this. So powerful stuff that came out of a research idea, really, and they're still having impact and still being sustained. I've whipped through this really fast. The last slide is a quote from Dean Glenn Carruthers, who passed away a few years ago, but you can read what's on the screen there. This is why we do this. This is why we do this kind of research. So I'll be happy to answer any questions later. I'm sorry if I zipped through that pretty fast. I could have given you 20 more examples of where research is engaged socially with the people in the communities around us. Thank you.
That looks like me. Yeah, I don't need it. I don't have slides. You can, maybe you can put it on off. Off, yeah, there. That's good. My name is Lucas Perron, and I'm in charge of a scholarly network with the title SIMM, and it stands for Social Impact of Music Making. And you mentioned François Matarazzo. François is was a co-founder of the SIMM network, and when we were discussing about how we would call the network, we had a lot of discussion with François because he wasn't so keen on us having call it social impact. But finally, we all agreed, François also, to call it that anyway, and because all those founding the network had questions about this this concept and the word, and also when you talk about social impact, you also I guess quickly think of the possibility of measurement and and fortunately even though we often hear that it's possible to measure, I personally also believe it's very difficult, and fortunately so, because if it were so easy to measure the impact, social impact of music making, that would mean that we humans are easily controllable, let's say. And fortunately, that's not at all how it works, and we are impacted by so many different things at the same time, and it's not easy to pinpoint where the changes in our lives have been impacted by. So that's to start with. But I would like to intervene with something that comes out of my personal research. I did my PhD research, and now I'm in the postdoctoral part of my research in Kinshasa, in Congo. And one of the groups that I follow closely is a group of men who were members of violent gangs. And so I followed them for 4 years during my PhD research, and now went to see them again last year and this year. And what really surprised me very much was that they were constantly complaining to me, saying, Lucas, well, we're doing, they became percussionists, playing African Congolese traditional percussion music, and they were complaining to me, saying, "Well, this is taking so much of our time. We're having to rehearse days in a week, and we hardly ever have concerts. When we have a concert, it's not paying much." And so I told them, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't understand. There's nobody who is obliging you to take all this time to play music, and so why not do any like many others here in the city of Kinshasa? You find other means to make a living and to make ends meet. What the big majority of the population in Kinshasa is busy with is to survive and to make ends meet." And the answer I got was, "Well, Lucas, no, you really don't understand. It's become too important for us making music." And so my whole research has been then. Well, the biggest part of my research has been focusing on trying to come together with them to an understanding of why it is then so important, even though the social and economical impact of making music clearly for these people living in very extremely hard circumstances was hardly present, hardly there, and still this didn't make them stop spending so much time and energy in the music. And so the answers are multiple.
Apparently these work now, so I don't know if you want to try them. Maybe pass one.
Were you stopping? Were you stopping there? Yeah. All right. Well, it would be wonderful. We have time for questions. Maybe I would love. I'm not playing X's and O's here. I've been taking notes. And maybe if it's okay, I'd love to just ask everybody on the panel a question first, and then maybe we can open it up to the floor. And maybe this is a little bit of a long-winded setup, but in listening to everyone, I mean, Lucas, helping to found or co-found SIMM, it's right there in the title, Social Impact of Music Making. And you just raised it a moment ago about measurement. Imogen also spoke about this issue of trying to measure impact or demonstrate impact. And yet, Imogen also mentioned sort of these demands of funders. And Lee, you didn't speak too much in terms of the background of the research projects and whatnot, but presumably there was some money involved. And I know that SIMM doesn't, nothing operates on air. And I know Rich, Community Music Schools of Toronto, money makes the world go round, let's say. But we also, Imogen also mentioned the dangers of some of the deficit thinking, as opposed to trying to reframe things in asset-based, which I appreciate, and yet I can't, there is certainly a trapping of deficit thinking, but sometimes when we think of these areas in the world or locally that have areas of high need, and maybe we're simply the ones defining what need is, but it seems difficult by any sort of semi-objective measure to describe some people in certain circumstances as, oh, that's great. I mean, I'm sure you're perfectly happy despite the impoverishment, right? So we have the dangers of these power imbalances, and that tempts us to the money. And as we might know, sometimes the money comes from a place of salvationism, if I can put it that way. And so, and because there's that introduction of salvationism, and let's say from people who maybe have deeper pockets than we do, is that maybe one of the sources of our exaggeration when it comes to the social impact of music making. Maybe we are tempted ethically to just fudge a little bit or overclaim and whatnot. And so I just wanted to ask each of you how you have sort of morally within yourself, and Rich, I mean, maybe first because you were right after me. I know that's a question you're dying to answer. So how do you navigate that tightrope? How do you do it?
Well, this morning I did it. So whenever you have to do it, you do it, and I'm a little dirtier for it, but I did it. I think you have to think that way. You have to, like, I'm not even kidding. Like, I did the dance. I'm not proud of it, but you do it so that you can, like, I think wiring myself that way is like, it's a necessary thing to leverage enough funding and sustainability. Like, look, we try to educate any donor that comes to us. Educate's the wrong word, but we try to like really fill them in on the nuances of this kind of work. But some of them don't want to hear it. They want their name on a wall. Like, there's no getting around it. And you may lose a donor in order to keep that. I'm not saying I don't have a set of principles that we go through when we're thinking of this stuff. But I did it this morning. I don't feel great about it. But it was a significant amount of money that I'm excited about what we're going to do with that in order to bring forward, just to do the work. Like, I'm not really, sometimes it's just, you know, you gotta, I don't know, maybe I'm off, but that's where I'm at this afternoon. I'm just like, we did it this morning, we did the thing, and I think money inevitably, especially right now where things are super tough, you gotta kind of navigate that closely and do what you can to remain sustainable and all that business when you're doing this kind of work. But there's a lot there. I'll stop. Yeah.
Imogen, do you want to follow that up? I mean, because it sounded, you did mention funding as part of that, and maybe there were no strings attached, and it was great. I mean, what do you think?
No, I think, am I having an issue? No, I'm okay. I think there's a question of accountability. Like, you're accountable to the people that you're working with, right? You're accountable to funders, like, on paper, but you're not accountable to them in terms of, like, that's not where the meaning is, really. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of how I thought about it when I've done evaluation stuff as well, is like, okay, I'm writing this report, and like I feel like it's cutting out a ton of the good stuff because I know that the funders want to see that someone's well-being went from a score of 1 to 5, and somebody's, you know, got a job now, and that means that everything's great. And like, this stuff doesn't, I mean, it's important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It doesn't mean everything. And like, but if it keeps the money coming in and it keeps the project running and able to continue generating kind of different kinds of meaning between people and between people and music, then I think that's where the accountability is, really. And so you got to dance with who you got to dance with. I don't know. I think it's like, yeah.
Well, I would like to add that it becomes even more difficult if you want to find money for research on music community, social music projects, because if you don't go around this, and if you're not claiming that research is proving anything, but trying to come to a better understanding of the practices that are being studied, and so that this better understanding may also help people in the practice. This is not a very easy position to be in, to convince sponsors, private or governmental sponsors, and so I'm constantly into that position. And
I might just add really quickly, I think it's a bit of an art form, all of this, right? Like of just like doing that elegantly, still staying principled, but making sure the priority is on, in our case, the kids and the work that we're doing in community, right? But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Lee, just before, I do want you to chime in on this, but since Lucas raised it, maybe just to make a clearer distinction, Rich's work, maybe we can describe that as like programming. You're offering programming, a variety of things. And so, of course, you have all the things you need to negotiate, but Lee, you described those projects, as research projects. And so there's a different kind of currency if you're a faculty member, for example, where our currency tends to be academic publications. We get credit. I mean, you don't get paid, but you have to report on what you've done every year. And in order to get published, it's easier to get published if it looks like you have findings, that you have something that you can report on. And of course, the more dramatic the findings, the more likely you are to be published. If you reported that you found no impact, then you're probably not going to get published. What about the research side, Lee, since you described it that way?
What do you mean there's no money in publication? My quarterly check was $18 for my last.
Yes, so, I also got one of those, but of course, then the publisher always says, we don't issue a check for under $100. So I got 16, and they don't issue you the 16.
I got a bank transfer for $18, and I showed my wife. I'm glad you spent those 3 years on that book.
Yeah.
So Roger's correct. The research projects I showed you were primarily student projects that were required for their programming. And they have there's a number of student funding. There's the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, OGS, and there are SHRC. These acronyms would probably drive you crazy if you're not from Canada, but Social Sciences and Research Council, Humanities Research Council of Canada. And then other funders are places, like the federal government has a program called Employment and Social Diversity of Canada group, and they fund a project called the New Horizons for Seniors projects. They're always changing it. So we've been able to capitalize on that. But I have to say that measurement and funding go hand in hand. How do we measure qualitative research? I think Lucas just said, it's not about proving things, but it's about deepening our understanding, or even perhaps generating better and deeper questions through our research. So for me, the accountability is in the narrative. It's not in the statistics, but it's in the stories. And we're a storied race. We gravitate towards that human experience that can be told through narrative form. And so, in a sense, the other thing I will say that in order for you to get any kind of government or tax-funded grants, you really have to be a full-time tenured professor in an institution that's a Canadian university. So that means that someone like Imogen, who's in a postdoc situation, would not be eligible for a SHRC grant unless Roger was the PI, and you do all the heavy lifting, Roger gets the credit. So that's kind of how that...
Hey, that sounds like a good deal.
I think so. Well, so and then our institutions have offices of research services, or what they call them, different things, that really, it's really good for the university to get this money. It looks great on the university, and the more money you get, the more money they get. And so they really do facilitate the grant application processes. So in a sense, this is available to us as tenured professors, but not available to Richard, who's qualified to be a tenured professor, but he's in another kind of not-for-profit corporation. So the playing field's really uneven when it comes to how to get funding for research.
I'm wondering if we might open up to the audience, and I don't know, am I supposed to run around with the microphone maybe? They've got a microphone somewhere. Are there questions? Yes, that looks like somebody who's waving their hand that can ask a question. Or you're just waving?
Here comes a mic behind you.
Okay. And please don't be shy. Mateus is just waving.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentations. They've raised a lot of issues, which I'm sure we are all aware of. I was wondering, because really we're in a catch-22 situation, in that in order to, I'm not an academic at all, I work more in Richard's area. In order to get a tax-funded grant, you have to put in an application which says, we're going to do this, and these are our outcomes, the impacts, if you like. Even though actually what you want to do is just go and have a fantastic time with a community that wants to have a fantastic time, and yet you have to qualify it as outcomes. I just wondered if there was any response, this is the way out of this catch-22. Thank you. I'd be fascinated to know.
I think if any of us had the answer to that, I think we would be probably not sitting up here. We'd be retired because we'd have figured out all the answers. Any thoughts from the panelists here? How do we make our way out of this never-ending demand that we have to have outcomes that are articulated in, let's say, traditional scientific language? Lucas, you sound like you...
Well, I think we don't necessarily playing the game of is difficult, and maybe we do not need to play this game. And I think we have a role also to try to make potential sponsors come to an understanding of what the practice can be about and what the research on the practice can be about, and so I think we have a role to play in this, and I think there are different ways by doing our best to bring them close to the practice, to invite them to be there and to come to meet with the project and how it goes and the practitioners of the project. But also other ways can be by that outcome is not necessarily only writing publications, but radio programs. I'm myself now busy working on podcast, and several of my colleagues, researchers, are making radio programs or making visual, films, videos on documenting practice and research on practice. So I think this is what is needed, and I think there are as many clever people out there in charge of sponsoring and governmental agencies as we are out here. So I think we have to believe in the possibility to bring people to look at it differently.
So Lee, yeah, let's take that. And just maybe to state the obvious, but just to make sure that it's clear, obviously there are differences in the expectations of different kinds of funding. So the philanthropic funding that Rich might deal with on a more regular basis has one set of expectations. The government funding, research funding that Lee spoke about a minute ago has a different kind of set of expectations, and all of those, of course, manifest in the various ways that we might then mobilize that in the language of knowledge mobilization and whatnot. But Lee, you were going to chime in on that.
Well, I was just wanted to follow up on your comment about outcomes, that and exactly what you just said. Every organization defines those differently, but I wanted to say that for the Circle of Music, the intergenerational choir with those living with dementia, we got documentary filmmaking funding from the Retired Teachers of Ontario Foundation, Rotero, I think they're called. They've never funded anything at a university level before. And so they want to know the outcomes for them, and they check in regularly. So we have like quarterly reports. What have you done with our money so far? They want to know that what they're investing in is something sustainable and would inform communities beyond our own local community. So that's the outcome. We're producing an artifact that will be a tool for somebody else who might want to start such a thing. For the Grand River Black Music Festival, we have a number of foundations supporting that. Their outcomes for them is they want to know what happens next. So the Black Brilliance event, the Kitchener Public Library, our closest partner, is featuring a day with Shad Kabango, the rapper, Shad the rapper. You probably, if you're around here, you know him. And he's spending a day talking and giving a symposium, then he's doing a show at night in the library. Shh, it's very quiet. No, this is a very loud library. And they will turn the big reading room into a kind of a club vibe setting. And the sponsors will be there as proud as punch because they know they had some skin in that game. So there's just a whole variety of ways to define outcomes. And if you want to raise money and have a street party and have a good time, then define some outcomes from that would please your funder. Like kind of have to read the room. What do these guys like? Well, they do like the sound of children playing. Well, make sure that happens. And then you've got an outcome. So it's, again, I go back to my narrative idea. It's about story. It's about what happened here. Let's tell the story.
I think we did, go ahead, but I just want to make sure. Yeah, I think we do have another question there.
Yeah.
Maybe we should.
I'll just be quick. Every donor is going to have different, some of them will just say, I want to remain anonymous, and here it is, and go have a good time. Because they get you, they trust you, they know what it's about, and others will be from the government, and it'll be months of reporting. So I think it is read the room. Yeah.
Is this working now? Okay. This has been such an interesting panel for me. I really appreciate all your insights. I want to go back to the research thing for a moment and make two observations. One is that I think our Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council is pretty hep. They, they sponsor research creation. I've been funded for projects where I frankly said, I'm going to work with these folks and I need to pay them all, amateur and professional musicians, at the leader rate of the Ottawa Musician Union. No problem. Right? So I think in some way I've been more encouraged by their openness than by the amount of education I've had to do in my own institution about this kind of research. That's one. But the other thing is I want to say, if you are lucky enough to have an institutional position from which to operate, then part of the responsibility in getting funding is to distribute it and get it out there. So in the work that I'm doing, we've spent several years developing a community-engaged research creation methodology where one of the principles is we pay people, right? It's so simple. If you're going to give your time to this as a consultant from the disability community maybe that I'm working with, you're going to get paid at CARFAC rates for your time. It raises all kinds of questions about sustainability there as well. But as an operating principle, to do the research in a good way is to ensure that the resources are going where they need to go. That's one. But the other side of it that I haven't actually heard a lot about at this conference is the people that we're working with are experts in their lives and conditions. The sex workers that worked on the sex worker opera are the absolute experts in that field. And so as co-researchers, if they're conceived in that way, they have really important things to tell us that don't just deepen our understanding of their situations, create empathy, help us to maybe help them, however that is conceived by them. It also adds to our store of knowledge about the ways in which the structures of power in our world operate. So I really want to say that the people that we're working with in community-engaged circumstances, the reason the research has to be led by them is that they are, in fact, the experts. And then that places me as a researcher in the position of making the sandwiches and setting out the chairs and getting some money and all the things you guys all do in your practice all the time. Yeah.
But I'm interested, such a great point. But those experts are silenced until somebody gives them a megaphone. So we have that capacity. If we're lucky enough to get a grant, we are their megaphone. Otherwise, they're not. They have very little agency. Sex workers wouldn't be on an opera stage without somebody like you comedian.
No, that's entirely untrue. I didn't have anything to do with.
But somebody did.
It was a very DIY grassroots project. They did a Kickstarter campaign.
But I think the point that was made in the comment was the funding needs to be distributed so that the experts have the voice to do what we need to hear from them to do.
But I would like to add that I don't see it quite that way, Lee, because I think the folks I've worked with in all kinds of different circumstances have plenty of voice. And it might be that the wrong people weren't paying attention, but they're doing the stuff, they're doing the thing in their own spheres. And I'm sure you have had this experience. I just get taken to school all the time by the people I'm working with. And it's not like just because I created a project and said, hey, here's some money, shall we do this thing? I feel pretty privileged if they're willing to give some of their time to my project, or increasingly that the project should be defined by them, not by me. So I just want to push back a little bit against that narrative of giving voice where there is no voice. I think the voice is there. We just have to listen.
Yeah, no, it's a very fine point. I would just, when we talk about knowledge creation, which is sort of this research speak kind of thing, there is something about the sort of legitimization of knowledge that when something appears in a peer-reviewed publication, then it becomes real. And so the sex workers opera is great, it happened, it was powerful, and of course it had impact on this level, but then when Imogen publishes that in the International Journal of Community Music, let's say, just hypothetically, you can read her article in that journal, suddenly it becomes legitimized and it becomes real in a way that it's still real, of course, in the community, but as academic knowledge that then becomes leverageable in service of something else. It just has a particular kind of credibility that it might not if it's just you publishing a blog post. Would you like to speak to that at all, Imogen?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think what you said about the kind of the expertise on systems of power in the world and lived experience and that kind of thing, but also experiences of projects, like they're the experts of that. No one else has had their experience of that project, and equally of research. I'm coming at research from a different perspective, and I think that's why I was so excited and grateful when the member I was speaking to said that, like, 2 fingers up to social impact quote, because it was just like this kind of, it just broke through like all of these things that I'd been thinking but hadn't really been able to say properly, and then they said it and it just made complete sense. So I think that kind of, sorry, Roger, I've lost the thread of your question.
Well, no, but I mean, it was just about, let's say, the credibility or the legitimization of knowledge. As soon as you've now published it in a peer-reviewed publication, now the knowledge of, and of course we can interpret this a couple different ways, but certainly their voices then become amplified, not that they aren't already amplified in the work in the community, but when it takes on this academic peer-reviewedness, it becomes, it has, you know, an institutionalized legitimacy that it might not if it's just on the ground, let's say. But then, and this is not to put you on the spot, you know, as we're closing out here, but maybe, but just the, whether you view it this way or not, but it's your name on the authorship of this article. Do you want to speak to the ethical tensions there?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, it's really, it's really complicated. The clock is counting down in front of my eyes. I think it's complicated. I've been surprised by how invested the kind of project, the sex workers opera directors have been in research. Like, I think I kind of started tagging along with them to everything that they did and volunteering as much as I could and all of that stuff because I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And then they really supported me as a researcher and really wanted me to continue kind of being involved with the project in that capacity. And that's been hugely impactful for me. But I think, yeah, it's something that I'm kind of now trying to figure out how to move forward with. It is useful for them, like it helps them with grant applications to say, you know, this has been published in an international journal and we have demonstrated our impact through this research and all of that stuff. And I think as much as I can serve the project in that way, I want to continue doing that without kind of overstating impacts, and they've never asked me to do that. And they're very critical of kind of the idea of improving people and that kind of rescue narrative that might come through. But yeah, my name is at the top of the article. It's weird. There's anonymity issues with other people, so it can't be that everyone's name is there. I would kind of like it to be if it could. I think research has a lot of power problems in it, and we haven't really cracked that yet. We're probably not going to in minus 30 seconds.
No, but that's what this whole event is about. And again, we did not promise answers in this session. We promised questions, and that's what we've hopefully tried to do. Any final words, Lucas? Okay. Well, as we're at T-minus 18 seconds, please join me in thanking this illustrious panel for sharing all their wisdom and projects here today.